One night when I was 12 years old, I snuck out of the house with a friend and I got caught smoking cigarettes by one of our neighbors. And I knew one thing. I knew my mom was going to kill me. For a minute, I thought that puff of cigarette smoke was going to be my last breath. You ever been in that kind of trouble where you think, that's it, I'm dead? Now, obviously that's a figure of speech, but what do you think it would actually take? Like, what would you have to do for your mom to literally kill you? Or your boss, or your spouse? What about God? What do you think you would have to do for God to kill you? Because that strange question, it might say more about how we understand God than we realize. Now, the first followers of Jesus, they didn't have to guess at the answer to that question. They saw it happen. Because in Acts chapter 5, two people gave money to the church, but they weren't completely honest about it, and they died. Now, to me, it looks like God killed them for doing something that he didn't like. But what kind of God does that? And why? Before we go any further, here's the lens for everything we're about to read. This isn't just a story about two people who told a lie. It's a story about what happens when you treat something sacred like it's casual. Because in Jesus, this community, it wasn't just a group of people anymore. It was the place where God lives. And when that's true, what we do to each other and who we pretend to be, it matters more than we think. So now, to get to the bottom of what they did wrong, we need to start with what the early church did right. So let's look at Acts chapter 4, 34 through 37. It says, there were no needy people among them because those who owned land or houses would sell them and bring the money to the apostles to give to those in need. For instance, there was Joseph, one of the apostles nicknamed Barnabas, which means son of encouragement. He was from the tribe of Levi, and he came from the island of Cyprus. He sold a field that he owned, and he brought the money to the apostles. This was the model, the template of the early church. They took care of each other. They protected their unity through generosity by giving to meet each other's needs. And in some cases, wealthy people even sold property to care for those in need. Barnabas was one of those people. And that wasn't normal. That didn't happen in the ancient world, but it's how the church functioned. And this is what it looked like when people understood what they were part of. They weren't just being generous. They were protecting something sacred, but not everyone saw it that way. Let's pick up in Acts 5:1. But there was a certain man named Ananias, who with his wife Sapphira sold some property. He brought part of the money to the apostles, claiming it was the full amount. With his wife's consent, he kept the rest. So here we find these two people, Ananias and Sapphira. They have the same wealth Barnabas had. And just like him, they sold property. They gave money. And on the surface, it looks the same, but it isn't. Let's continue in Acts 5:3. Then Peter said, Ananias, why have you let Satan fill your heart? You lied to the Holy Spirit and you kept some of the money for yourself. The property was yours to sell or not sell as you wished. After selling it, the money was also yours to give away. How could you do a thing like this? You weren't lying to us, but to God. As soon as Ananias heard these words, he fell to the floor and died. Everyone who heard about it was terrified. And then some young men got up, wrapped him in a sheet, and took him out and buried him. Ananias lied about what he gave. And it appears God killed him for it. And the worst part is he didn't even have to lie. The property was his. The money was his. There was no obligation or expectation. But there was Barnabas. When I pull up at Starbucks and they tell me that the person in front of me paid for my coffee, it doesn't make me feel happy. It makes me feel pressure because now I got to pay for the person behind me. And now instead of my coffee, I'm covering their $10 monstrosity of whips and syrups and shots. I bet when Barnabas set an example of selling property, the pressure on Ananias to do the same thing was enormous. So he did it, but he lied about keeping some back for himself. He wanted Barnabas-level recognition without Barnabas-level sacrifice. And in a community like this, that matters. Because this only works if it's real. The moment people start pretending, it stops being about truth and it starts being about image. And when that happens, the thing that God's building doesn't grow. It starts to fall apart. And when Peter confronted Ananias, he dropped dead. But he wasn't the only one to die that day. Let's look at Acts 5:7. About 3 hours later, his wife came in not knowing what had happened. Peter asked her, "Was this the price you and your husband received for your land?" "Yes," she replied, "that was the price." And Peter said, "How could the two of you even think of conspiring to test the Spirit of the Lord like this? The young men who buried your husband are just outside the door, and they'll carry you out too." Instantly, she fell to the floor and died. When the young men came in and saw that she was dead, they carried her out and buried her beside her husband. Great fear gripped the entire church and everyone else who heard what had happened. So the story repeats. Just like her husband, Sapphira lied about their gift and died on the spot. If you're a skeptic, this may be proof that the God of Christianity is cruel and vindictive. If you're wrestling with faith, this may be the thing holding you back. And if you're a reasonable person of faith, even you have to admit that this is a hard pill to swallow. My faith has been challenged by questions this story raises. Like questions like, if God kills the people who make him mad, is he a God worth following? How do we explain a God of love doing something like this? Well, maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe a better question is, what did they really do wrong? Because on the surface, it doesn't look that bad. They gave money, they just weren't fully honest about it. It's like, what's the big deal? It was a big deal to Jesus, because this is exactly the kind of thing that he went after, performative religion. And it wasn't because Jesus was a stickler for the rules, but because he knew what it does to people. When religion becomes performance, people get hurt. And this became the thing that Jesus called out the most. Look at what he said in Matthew 23, 1 through 28. It says, the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees, they're the official interpreters of the law of Moses. So practice and obey whatever they tell you, but don't follow their example. For they don't practice what they teach. Everything they do is for show. They love to sit at the head banquet at banquets and in the seats of honor at the synagogues. They love to receive respectful greetings as they walk in the marketplaces and to be called rabbi. Hypocrites! For you're so careful to clean the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside you're filthy, full of greed and self-indulgence. Outwardly, you look like righteous people, but inwardly, your hearts are filled with hypocrisy and lawlessness. Jesus welcomed sinners. He ate with them. He made them his disciples. But Jesus didn't mess with religious hypocrites. Jesus didn't mess with people who represented God by presenting themselves as something that they weren't for glory and attention and power. I don't like biscuits and gravy. So if I start a restaurant, biscuits and gravy is not going to be on the menu. Jesus does not like hypocrisy. And when Jesus starts a movement, hypocrisy is not going to be on the menu. It has no place in his church. Why? Because it hides the type of sin that hurts people, that breaks unity, that sows division. Pride, deception, greed, they all destroy community. And community is at the center of the kingdom of God that Jesus is building. When Ananias and Sapphira deceived the community of believers about their gift, they became the Pharisees. They introduced the thing Jesus hated most into the church he loved most. But what happened to them, it was about so much more than bad behavior. Look at what Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 3:16. Don't you realize that all of you together are the temple of God and that the Spirit of God lives in you? The church, it's not just a gathering. God doesn't live in a temple or building anymore. He lives in his people, which means together we are the temple. And if Jesus wouldn't tolerate hypocrisy in a physical temple, why would he allow it in a living one? Ananias and Sapphira were part of that temple. And just like the Pharisees brought corruption into the Jewish temple, they brought it into Jesus's temple. But God wasn't having it. Knowing this, we can understand why it mattered. We can understand why Jesus cared so much. But there's still a problem. It still feels like an overreaction. Why death? Why would treating something sacred casually lead to something that severe? Well, to understand that, we need to look at another moment where something like this happened, because this isn't the first time. Just like the temple, the Ark of the Covenant, it was a holy and sacred item to the people of Israel and to God. And when the people of Israel were moving it from one place to another, someone else died. Check it out in 2 Samuel 6, 3-7. They placed the Ark of God on a new cart. And when they arrived at the threshing floor of Nacon, the oxen stumbled, and Uzzah reached out his hand and steadied the Ark of God. Then the Lord's anger was aroused against Uzzah, and God struck him dead because of this. So Uzzah died right there beside the Ark of God. This story seems familiar, right? God got mad and killed someone. But this one seems even more unfair. I mean, all this guy did was try to keep the ark, this sacred item, from falling off the cart onto the ground. What do we do with this? Well, it makes sense when you realize this isn't about God being angry. It's about not following the ark's instruction manual. And the instructions say this in Numbers 4, 5-15. It says, when the camp moves, Aaron and his sons must enter the tabernacle first to take down the inner curtain and cover the Ark of the Covenant with it. They must put the carrying poles of the ark in place, and the Kohathites will come and carry these things to the next destination. But they must not touch the sacred objects, or they will die. The ark is sacred, and there were specific instructions for how to handle it. Certain people who could handle it, certain people who had to carry it. And if anyone touches this sacred object, it will kill them. Now, look at how they were moving the ark. They put it in an ox cart, no curtain covering it, no carrying poles. They weren't properly following the instructions. You've seen signs around electrical boxes or power lines that say, danger, touching this may result in electrocution that will result in serious injury or death. That sign tells you that electricity can be dangerous and it needs to be handled with care. If you get electrocuted, it's not personal. It's a consequence of mishandling something powerful. When Uzzah touched the ark and died, it wasn't because he broke a rule. It was because he didn't respect the posted signs. God is a live wire. He's not casual, and neither is what he's building. And when something is sacred, it has to be treated that way. And that's the point. Ananias and Sapphira, they weren't just breaking a rule. They were treating something sacred, the community where God lived, like it was ordinary, as something to be leveraged for their own purposes. And when that happens, it degrades community until eventually it destroys the sacred thing that God is building. And the early church understood this. Take another look at 1 Corinthians 3:16-17. Don't you realize that all of you together are the temple of God and that the Spirit of God lives in you? God will destroy anyone who destroys this temple. For God's temple is holy, and you are that temple. This is where it all comes together. God is a live wire, and so is his temple, the community centered around Jesus. And messing with it will result in serious injury or death. Not because of a broken rule, but because there is a power running through the community of Christ that when handled correctly brings life, but it can be hazardous to those whose actions would hurt it. The deception of Ananias and Sapphira endangered the unity of the church. And just like the hypocrisy of the Pharisees corrupted the Jewish temple, their hypocrisy threatened the new temple of God. They were handling something sacred carelessly. They ignored the posted sign. They touched a live wire in a way that they weren't supposed to, and it cost them. The story of Ananias and Sapphira is unsettling, and it should be. Not because God is unpredictable, but because this community, this temple, is more sacred than we realize. This isn't just a gathering or a service. It's not just a group of people trying to do better. This is the place where God lives. And because of that, what happens here matters more than we think. Who we really are, how we treat each other, who we all pretend to be, they matter. And don't miss this. If this is the place where God lives, then that means you are part of something sacred. You're not just attending something, you're part of a temple, which means you are not ordinary. You are not disposable. You are sacred to be handled with care. God chose to make his home here in you. That's why it matters how you live. It matters how you show up, how you treat the people around you. Because this only works if it's real, if we respect and take care of the temple God's building. And when it is, this becomes the kind of place where people are actually known and actually changed. Something sacred, something worth taking care of. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time.